Welcome. 500 MPs in Uganda are each going to wake up in the morning and find 100 million deposited on their accounts out of the blue, just like that. I don't know. It's painful to have to endure with this kind of tiring, energy draining news that comes out of Uganda. Today, we want to talk about the MP's cash bonanza. We want to talk about coffee. I think there's a 66 billion Uganda shillings that's been given to Gume and a factory in Ntungamo to process coffee, which, Tugume is another Ugandan like any of us. He's entitled to try and, make it if he can, and we should support him, and the government should support him if they can. But we just need to have a look at whether it makes any business sense and economic sense, and whether it makes sense for all of us as a country to benefit from a venture like that. I really want to talk about what alternatives we have in terms of what can we export as a country, as a region. What are we known for? And then lastly, it's just to understand. I'm trying to read as much as possible to understand how Uganda is evolving, what kind of state it's evolving into, and these are some of the things I really want to talk about today. I want to start by it's just unbelievable. It's preposterous to believe that Ugandan MPs have accepted to take 100 million each of taxpayers' money, and then they come out so blatantly, so boldly, and start denying, and the political gaslighting and the callousness of people in Uganda today. They're no longer embarrassed and ashamed. They come up with these preposterous things to say on TV, like they don't care. It's fine for them. And we have been beaten so much as a country to now accept these things as common fodder. It's okay for people to steal government money whilst we sit and watch. It's become very gerund, like nobody cares anymore. It's just the order of the day. But I mean, ask yourself how we've just come out of calamity after calamity. I mean, there's people in Chitezi having all this rubbish landfill falling into their houses, and people are still buried in there today. The city is underwater, it's all flooding, and there are no channels, and rich people are building in channels and waterways, and nobody is bothered or caring about people like that. And then you find yourself in a situation where the people who are supposed to be legislating on behalf of Ugandans are having a cash bonanza, 100 million each. The truth of the matter is, the role of an MP is diminished now. It's useless to be an MP in Uganda because, I mean, what does an MP do? An MP doesn't do anything. An MP, if you understand the makeup of Parliament is made up of 500 MPs, and about 70% of them come from the ruling National Party, which is NRM. And in there, they just go and get dictates from one person who then comes and imposes his will inside the parliament, and that's what goes. Uganda is a country of broken spirits right now, and everybody really doesn't care anymore what the parliament does to us. They can do whatever they want because we've gotten to the point where we've become so used to being abused as a people. There's a very big, deep-seated complacency that's gotten into us now that we don't care anymore. I mean, apart from the people who are called the hooligans or the NUP or lumpens and etc. Those are the only ones who are making noise now on behalf of the rest of Ugandans. Which professors have you had come out? Which bank managers have you had come out? Which CEOs of big organizations which are paying a lot of taxes to the country have come out to condemn such an act? These people no longer care anymore. I mean, people have become we have something called the cargo cult syndrome now, where the cargo cult syndrome was one of those I think Trinidad and Tobago, one of those Pacific islands where just before the World War II, some bombers were bombing the place, and when they were dropping supplies, the soldiers of the U.S. Army would come and draw patterns on the runway and show exactly where to drop, and the planes would drop these supplies, and the natives would see how these supplies would just fall from the sky, and these guys would share some whilst they leave the rest on the runway, and the natives would also come and take some. So what the natives then started doing was they would do these patterns. When the war ended, the natives kept on that practice for almost 6 months. It was almost like believing in a god out there that one day, that as long as they come and draw these patterns on the runway, planes are going to come and drop supplies. We are there, we are sat, we are in limbo, we don't care anymore. That's how much. We're not going to ask what 100 million will do for each parish. I mean, that's 100 million is what they give each parish in Uganda for PDM. But the total of the 500 MPs, amongst them, what they're sharing is equivalent to 50 billion. Now, Mulago Hospital, the biggest hospital in Uganda, has been allocated 18 billion for the rest of the year to buy medicine. 18 billion for the rest of Uganda, and these guys are pocketing 50 billion. So, let me not belabor that point. I mean, it's in the news, everybody has seen it. It makes absolutely no sense. But be that as it may, we are where we are, and we have to accept this abuse. And I hope that the opposition has become so sober. It stands up for righteousness, and a society will always relinquish itself. It will always cleanse itself. It doesn't matter how far down you try and drag it. A society will always find its middle ground and relinquish itself from the ashes of hell. You can see now that the opposition has put its foot down, and they're not going to first of all take that money. They're also putting very strong measures to ensure that there's zero tolerance for this kind of black level corruption. They're also making sure that they're going to expose those MPs who have taken that money so that they don't come back into the next parliament. And that's probably, in fact, it's a good thing that it has come out of this time. Imagine, top echelons in the parliament are denying this money, but the president is saying that the money was given out. So who's fooling who? Staying still on the parliament of Uganda, 66 billion Uganda shillings was allocated to just one gentleman, Nelson Tugume, to improve on our coffee, make it better, and make it more marketable, add value to the coffee and then sell it out there. And that's a very good thing. It's a very, very good thing. It's a very good concept. And we hope that we can get much more for the buck. The president has really come out strongly and suggested these things to Ugandans and said, we're selling ourselves short. We go out there and in the value chain of coffee, I think we only, as one of the biggest exporters, second to Brazil, we only get about 10% of the value chain of coffee, And his idea is if we process this coffee from Uganda, we might make more money. And this is subject to debate, and maybe people need to come out and debate it with very cool, level-headed, arguments. And my take is, and this is mostly because of my exposure to the Western world, I don't think it's the right concept, and I could be wrong. But you need to listen to me and try and understand my point of view. It's not a question of you just dismiss what I'm saying. You try and listen to me and then make your point across, and then let's come out with the best proposition. Companies like Starbucks, there's a CEO of a company called Starbucks. I think it's called Howard Schultz. He was the CEO for a very long time. I think he left, but he made a lot of money, and he was one of the biggest, most successful CEOs in the world. And if anybody knows Starbucks, they're very big on coffee. He has time and again given so many lectures about the coffee value chain and the success of Starbucks and what it has taken them to become a very big brand for coffee and how they've sold their coffee. And I'm going to tell you that almost about 70% of his story is the bullshit that comes on top of the coffee, not the bean. It's the story that comes with it. It's the branding. It's the, Howard Schultz is a guy who once said that we're going to make an ultra premium coffee forward experience that our customers will enjoy in our coffee shops. Can you imagine? Ultra forward, ultra premium, immersive coffee forward experience. This is all marketing jargon. It makes you believe that, man, these guys, whatever they're selling it from. Take a sip in their plastic, in those cardboard cups with plastic lids, you take a sip in there and you're sipping on gold. That's what they make you believe. And that's why they're able to cream on top of all that value more money. These guys have made their point forward that you don't have, people are not going to come and buy Ugandan coffee because it is the best Ugandan coffee made from Uganda and grown in Ugandan soils by Nelson Tugumen, etc. You might want to position yourself more into the culture, into the beliefs, into the thinking, into the way of life of the people. And that's how the coffee gains that value. In the offices we work in today, people have 3, 4, 5 cups of coffee a day. They don't know the brand. They have absolutely no idea what brand it is. They don't know which bean it is, where the bean comes from. They're not even concerned about that. But the person that makes the coffee in the office has brought a fancy coffee maker and he's branded it Alan's Coffee or something like that. And it has a steamer, it has a filter, the water is filtered. He uses a filtration mechanism for the coffee for the water that makes the coffee. And then he has good coffee filters. And, his selling point, his value proposition in all this is the filtration mechanism of his machine, the barista that then dispenses a fantastic premium cup of coffee for you. So, for us to try and attack that narrative is going to take much more than just opening up a factory in Uganda, a processing factory in Uganda. It takes many stakeholders. It takes a lot of marketing. The story. What's the story on top of the bean? And how is that story told? Is it a story of bills passed amidst MPs' backs being broken? I mean, Shamim Malende is in hospital right now trying to fight for a coffee bill. You really want people to go and drink her pain? She's in a hospital in Nairobi. She's making international news. She is the woman MP of Kampala Central. She was bundled out of the parliament by men, soldiers who are trained to kill terrorists. She's beaten. There's a president of an MP who was beaten, whose back was broken, Namboze. There's another MP who died, Segirinya, who was incarcerated for months on end. And then now there's an MP who came to fight a coffee bill for Uganda, and she's in hospital in Nairobi making cross-border news. And then you want that to be the story. So it doesn't matter how much you're going to slurp on top of your bean. If the story is not right, it doesn't make sense. Then there's also simple logistical errors that have been made. I mean, you put a factory in Ntungamo. So if I'm in Bali, then I have to drive my coffee to Ntungamo first. It's processed, and then whoever is exporting it now exports it in bulk from Ntungamo to the other. I don't know if that makes sense. That's fine. The terrain in which this factory has been built, the factory is built at a very steep hill and all these things. And I'm just wondering why it didn't have to be a flat surface. I mean, that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, it takes a concerted effort of many stakeholders to be brought into one room to have a think tank around coffee and create a good story that sells. That's the only way people will then solicit and look out and seek Ugandan coffee and then give it the premium value that it requires. But it's not a question of you have very good soils and you make a very good bean. That's just not going to help. I mean, you're not going to uproot all the buildings in Kampala where the best soil for coffee is. The best soil for coffee, by the way, is from Kampala Road, that whole area. If you planted a good coffee bean there, you get premium coffee. But you're not going to remove those things. So what do you then do? So people are selling all kinds of beans from wherever they are. And they don't even care what kind of coffee bean it is, but the way they're packaging their story is what's selling them, and they're making more. People ask you, so what can we do? We can't just give up, and everything can't just be wrong, and we can't just be bashing our country all the time and saying this won't work and that won't work. Then what will work? And it's just in one of those classical economics lectures where they tell you that if every country should stick to what it does best. if the UK and Portugal are both very good wine producers and also very good coffee producers, it might make sense for the UK to concentrate on coffee and then Portugal concentrates on wine. And that's how you bring this equilibrium and then trade more amongst each other. But if you're both fighting for, there's a lot of the nuances around how we all benefit come from classical economics. It evens itself out eventually. If you're all trying to have if you're all fighting within the red ocean, trying to undercut everybody, you're motivated by greed, you're motivated by making sure that the other person doesn't get, then you can't benefit. Because if the other person benefits and they earn some money and they are becoming more successful and prosperous, then they become your potential customer. So whilst you rise, you must make sure that your opponent rises as well, because not your opponent, but your competitor rises in whatever they're doing, because they then can also be a customer to you and they will push you far. But all this comes out of the sophistication of a nation. How sophisticated are you? There's in economics, there's something called the Economic Complexity Index. Yeah, it measures how complex is your society in terms of processing things. If you look at a comparison between Congo and Switzerland, Congo obviously has a lot more, gold than Switzerland. But Switzerland is the world's biggest exporter of gold, and they probably don't even mine any gold in Switzerland. Thinking about in 2022, they imported 115 billion US dollars worth of gold from wherever in the whole world. 115 billion US dollars worth of gold. They import that. That's Switzerland. When they import it, they get the best of their best people. They are artisans, they are craftsmen, they are tinkerers, they are all these sophistications, these sophisticated arts. They come up with very ornamental things like gold watches. The highest value of something today is something called a Swiss gold watch. A Swiss golden Rolex watch. That's something that can make your hand be cut off in Johannesburg. So these guys have imported gold from Congo. They brought it into their country. They have given it the best finesse. They've given it the best artisans. They've given it the best story on top of that. That is a Swiss Rolex that is made of gold. And then they've exported it to Russia, to Saudi Arabia, to even to countries like South Sudan. You'll be shocked. Some big oil oligarchs there are buying these things. So by the time a South Sudanese is flying to Switzerland to buy Congolese gold in a watch, he is paying tons and tons and layers of money on top of what he would have bought if he just crossed the border into Congo and bought the same watch. But it takes much more than just waking up in the morning and creating a factory of watches in Congo. You can't just wake up in the morning and build a factory of watches in Congo and then put a big word there, Rolex. Then you say, Congolese Rolex watches. A Swiss Rolex watch and a Congolese Rolex watch. Imagine a country which has gold inside its country. There's a high likelihood that people will buy the Swiss Rolex watch. And all this is just the story behind that watch. And that's what we need to sell. What sells out there is not the product, it's the finesse, it's the story, it's the marketing. And this is what people need to understand. So we do not bash Nelson Tugume for what he's trying to do. That's a very good thing. But what story does he slap on top? Is it the story of Jat torturing voters in Kawempe? Ultra premium coffee made in Africa, etc. Those are the things. We are very big on coffee, but we have not sold the coffee story. There's something that we have sold world over. We are known as a very vibrant economy for party. Unfortunately, the Congolese are known for music. Ugandans are known for party. Unfortunately, Uganda at some point in time, Kampala used to be the party capital of the world. People used to come from Nairobi, from the UK, from etc. People from the diaspora used to come home for party, And these things can be looked at as a very simple thing, but they used to turbocharge the economy. People used to bring in foreign exchange to spend within our country, and these things used to drive our economy. Eritreans and Ethiopians have come from their country and set up huge bars in premium suburbs within Kampala. Look at Acacia Avenue, and these guys are making tons and tons of money. If you look at the things that sell online on TikTok, on all these channels, the biggest TikTok chat show right now is Champaya, and it's all about girls and party and all these things. These are the things that Ugandans are interested in. This is where you need to harness your potential and all your energy. And we have been lucky enough that we have had a country that has not been, until recently, our country used to be very free and very safe and very relaxed. And this is how countries start to fail and start to progressively falter and kill themselves. Because back in the day, Uganda was a country where you go and walk into any ATM at, in the middle of the night, doesn't matter which ATM or which roads, and withdraw any amount of money and walk freely without any care in the world for anything. Now, more and more increasingly, there are very many fat cats and hungry dogs on either side. And the hungry dogs are not just watching; they're waiting for their time to eat. And that's what this big inequilibrium has brought about a lot of insecurity. The politics of the country has progressively become worse. And I've been reading a book by Dostoevsky, and Dostoevsky is a very big author on communism in the Far East, and I was just trying to understand how countries descend into communism and how and what communism means. And Dostoevsky wrote a book called The Possessed. You really need to go and look for this book. And he talks about how states just progressively disintegrate. If you look at Uganda, we came from feudalism, in the 60s and the 70s, just pre-colonial times. To pre-independence times, we were largely a feudal state. There was a lot of people outside the money market. There were some people who were just depending on subsistency, but also many people were not really involved in what was happening in the world. Came capitalism, which was a very good concept for the country. Obote too, and obviously Museveni in the beginning was a very strong advocate of capitalism. The best succeeded, bad ideas were defeated. It was a meritocracy. It doesn't matter who you are or what you are, but if you came out with a very good idea and you're ambitious and you're very hardworking, you made it to the top. Everybody had a fair chance at everything. We had real technocrats and real entrepreneurs. Now you have bureaucrats that are related to, they're all cousins in one clan, and tumbocrats, people who just sit there and say, how much do I take? How much do I take? Absolutely no ideas whatsoever. You start to see more and more influence from the state. The state becomes more overbearing, and competition becomes difficult because companies that are aligned with the state or the state ideology or the state's agenda are the ones that succeed and they're given protection, and it's very hard to compete with them. Cutting out other companies from the competition stifles ideas. It regresses the mean. We all become mediocres and we all stay within the same realm. We don't get Elon Musks or whoever who come out and just try and do things that are outside of, out of this box, because the system does not allow that. We're all contained in one space. And that was we started progressively moving from capitalism. We had big companies, the MTNs that just come, the multi-choices. We ushered in Kenyan banks from Nigeria, banks from the West, the Eco Banks of this world, and the Who's. Those are the times when guys like Elvis Sechanzi, who the young entrepreneurs, Isaac Mulindwa, etc. These guys were booming. There was a boom market. TVs that started, the Emakatos, Sanyo FM, I don't know, Capital FM. There was all these Van Veens, DSTV. There was a lot of euphoria. Things were really, really starting to move, and there were local ideas that would come up, make it to the top, and then big companies would come and usurp those local ideas and turn them into something even much more magical. It made sense. It made everybody had a fair shot at everything. That's how you saw the guys who are really pushing Palm Awards, Silk Royale, Angenois, all these things. I think there were guys who came up with ambience and all these things. There was a whole kaleidoscope of a blossoming environment full of life. And it didn't matter which party you subscribe to, which tribe you are, or which clan you are, or whose cousin you are. That all didn't matter. You just made it to the top if you tried hard enough. So we find ourselves today, progressively that energy was sucked away from people. People who were seen as powerful, they started taking away their power. The Agasekalala seniors, the Mulwanas, the Wavamunos, because we're not sure who do these people support, where do they belong, etc., and all these things. And you started seeing the rise of oligarchs, the people who are from the inside, either by relationship, nepotism, or by corruption, or by grand-scale thuggery, or by circumvency. When somebody urinates, they say that's a very beautiful urine. Those are the guys who started now making it to the top, becoming so powerful, And when you progressively look at the state, it now becomes something somewhat democratic socialist state. Because there's, and that's, and I don't want to compare it to France, because maybe France is really a democracy, but it's more of a system that rewards sycophancy, that rewards ideology, that rewards things like that. But there is a semblance of electing a leader and other leaders in different positions and etc. So it sort of fuses and borrows a few doctrines from capitalism and still employs them on this side, but essentially it pushes people more into socialism, because when you see people now start to they stop to use their own effort, they start to rely on the government more. The government becomes front and center. It either imposes tariffs, it gives discounts to people, it gives tax holidays to people, it gives grace periods. When you're in trouble, you run to the government, you run to the leaders, you bow down, you worship you worship the other person, and then you get let off the hook. And that's how now a state starts to turbocharge and spiral itself into communism. Now, you can think of communism all you want and think it's a simple thing, but communism is one of the worst systems of leadership in the world. And yes, it maintains law and order and everybody is kept in line, but there are absolutely zero liberties even for the people in the system. Communism, people have seen communism where people have had to kill family members, jail loved ones, jail children, sons, daughters, wives, and etc. You will be in line, but you are all kept in line, including those who are the biggest proponents of communism. And communism has never succeeded anywhere, because what you see is an endless agenda of never-ending dreams and hopes and people never getting there. Let's look at all the examples. The first person, the father of communism, really is Chairman Mao, and he was just a disaster. I mean, he brought about something called the Great Leap Forward, and he turned everybody into a peasant farmer society where all Chinese were wearing the same clothes, they looked the same, and they all had one activity, and they all worked for the state. You were just slaves. You all worked for slave labor. This is the typical Karl Marx theory of economics. You all belong in one state where there is the labor theory of value. Everybody is seen as a commodity to create value out of labor. Even the prisoners were part of the whole labor chain. Imagine when you work on a farm for a government, as you would if you worked on a farm for yourself. The catastrophe, the disaster that comes out of that is Chairman Mao killed in the upwards of 16 million Chinese people just to make sure that agenda was taken forward. And you see, the problem with communism is, number one, the leaders stay long in power. They never achieve their agenda because it's a never-ending agenda. It's always morphing and changing and turning. You never come to a conclusive end of these are the things we want to achieve and how we're going to achieve them. It just keeps on spiraling slowly and slowly until it wears the leader out, and the leader grows old and stops running the state, and people running for him until he dies, and then he is given a successor who then takes another 50 to 70 years. That's the never-ending challenge of communism. Fidel Castro, he was willing to bomb the whole of Cuba to ashes just to fight a war with America in 1982 to 1985. That's their thing. These guys are willing to kill everything else just to make sure that their will be heard, their will be made. They see themselves as superior beings to everybody else. They almost see themselves in the image of God. They become godly in a sense, and they never ever give chance to any dissenting voices, any other opposing people, any rise to the next man next to them. They do not orient themselves upward like the man next to them. They see themselves as superior and everybody else is beneath them, including family members. That's how they are. The biggest, most lethal, hideous culprit of all is a gentleman called Lenin. And it took me a very long time, and I had to first read this book to understand that Lenin was worse than Stalin. I always thought Stalin was, the hellboy of communism. I didn't understand that Lenin was 10 times worse. First of all, Stalin worked for Lenin. So it can only show you that if somebody works for Lenin, then they are a very bad person. I mean, if Stalin is one of the people who works for you, then you are a very bad person. Stalin was a terrible person. Brought about the rise of the Gulag state. It brought about, all those prison camps. He attacked people with famine, with hunger, with what? He used very bad tactics to subdue people. He kept everybody in line. He really made sure that the regression of Russia that we see today was the architect of Lenin. Stalin only followed through. All these other guys in the middle there, Gorbachev and whoever came in, but the fabric of that society is now built to understand that the only way it can be held together, can be welded together, is if it is in a communist society. And that's just wrong. It's very mind-boggling because you find yourself in a very capricious situation where you cannot do anything for yourself in a state. You cannot oppose, you just have to toe the line. If you have a very good idea, if you're not a state-sponsored person, you're not going to go far. If it's your idea, you got to give it to the state. If it's your idea, you got to push it hard, but make sure the state takes all the credit. You can never take credit for yourself. You can never prosper. You don't come out so far because you are supposed to be managed within the boundaries and the borders of the country, so you never ever progress beyond the boundaries of the border. They keep you contained. Stalin came through and followed through whatever Lenin had built, because Lenin killed upwards of 50 million people and etc. And Stalin killed more Russians than anybody else. Actually, Stalin had wars against people where he killed more Russians than those people killed Russians. That's the nature of these guys, those communists who believe in superior, godly beings and creating a state where there are no ideas and the only idea is the state's idea. And I see ourselves slowly descending into that kind of situation, because when you see some of the people who are psychophants, the people who really, really defend the state actions, are radicals, and sometimes they don't even want to listen to your views. When you try and create an opposing view, in democracy, a democratic society requires that. I don't agree with what you're saying, but I must defend your right to say it. And you must be able to say it, and let's all hear it. And after we hear it, then we decipher, then we debate on ideas. We all put our ideas forward, and the best idea wins. Societies that make it are built on ideas. They're built on rights. They're built on property rights. The right for people, free speech. The right for people to express themselves. Freedom of expression. And we are a young country, and we've got to be given time to prosper. But when we stifle people's mindsets, we push and propel ourselves into a very dark abyss that we might never come out of. And this is all we're trying to tell, the people on the other side. So is there any end in sight? Of course there's. Countries will always find themselves in, I think it was Martin Luther King who said, the arc of justice is long, but it will always come to pass. It will always bring itself to light. So it doesn't matter how long. It will take us a bit of time to undo everything that's happening to us right now, especially as the regime postures itself and entrenches itself for longevity and prosperity and eternity. Many things are going to have to be undone to go back to the center, where we have leftists, we have rightists, but we all come in the middle and agree to move forward as a country. It's going to take us a bit of time to build all these things, to bring them back together, but we must. We're gonna have to find civic societies, educate people, tell them that when people steal your money and you don't have medicines in the hospital, then you must not vote for them. These things, I think where we are now, the central region is now saturated with this kind of information. They've understood it, and that's the rise of young people that we're seeing today, good leaders, the Joel Senyonis and who's these guys are coming out with firebrand, styles of leadership where they're incorruptible, they believe in the truth, and they uphold themselves, and they see everybody with their pristine, transcendent work. They believe we're all made in the image of God, and that's how you see them holding themselves upright. You can see today guys like Ariho, the new guild president of Mbara University. Mbara is supposed to be the stronghold of NRM, but by the time these young guys are coming together to entrust their leadership with a person who subscribes to NUP, it must tell you something, that the young guys are seeing how the old guard is going off course. And they're saying we need to replenish ourselves as a society. Now, in the absence of gulags and force and might and jat and etc., if those things don't come in to keep Uganda into a total totalitarian communist state, the state will replenish itself. It will rejuvenate. It will renew itself. It definitely has to give birth to something new, and it has to go back to capitalism and democracy, because that's the best system of society, classical economics, where if the best shall succeed and those who can't will be held down before they touch the bottom by the social safety fabric of the society. That there's a safety net, the bottom line. That if you cannot afford to pay for yourself in a very good hospital, at least the state will put medicine for you in a public hospital. That is classic economics. That is democracy. And that's where we all need to orient ourselves towards. I thank you.